Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Caden Kubler and welcome to Caden's Corner. The best time of year is here. The NFL is officially back, and what a slate of games to kick everything off. Last night we saw Ravens and Chiefs, and tonight we get a great matchup in Brazil between the Eagles and Packers. Now heading into this year, there's a lot of pressure on this Eagles team. After they went to the Super Bowl against the Chiefs and lost, they were one of the hottest teams in the league to start the year. They were 10-1 at one point last season, but then things went south very fast. Coming into this year, there is so much pressure on this Eagles squad, but the guy under the most pressure is head coach Nick Sirianni. Now this offseason, there were some reports that came out that Sirianni's and Hurts' relationship was fractured. And to me, this makes sense. There's kind of an off vibe from him at times. You saw last year after they beat the Chiefs when he's running into the tunnel yelling at Chiefs fans, "I told you so." And then during the Super Bowl when he's waving to the other side and you see Jalen Hurts have to be the more responsible one and pull his arm down and kind of shake his head like, dude, what are you doing? And I think this whole dynamic right now is just off between Sirianni and Hurts, but not just between those two. I think it's Sirianni and the entire team. Now, Sirianni hit his peak with the Eagles 2 seasons ago when they were in the Super Bowl, had that thriller against the Kansas City Chiefs, but ultimately lost. And this is when things would seemingly start to go downhill. In the offseason, they lost both of their coordinators in Shane Steichen and Jonathan Gannon. They both ended up becoming head coaches, with Gannon going to the Cardinals and Steichen going to the Colts. And at the beginning of last season, you could immediately tell that the team wasn't the same without both of these guys. This offense wasn't humming like it was the year before. Sirianni wanted to call plays at one point, and then he gave the play calling duty back. This defense went from being one of the best units in football during their Super Bowl run, and last year it was one of the worst in all of football. The secondary was being picked apart by every single quarterback, and they were giving up 30 points left and right. And you could tell this is when the focus started to shift onto head coach Nick Sirianni. But the pressure and heat didn't necessarily turn up on him, as they were 10-1, they were the number 1 seed in the NFC, and they were seemingly a lock to get back to the NFC Championship or Super Bowl. But then things went south really fast. They'd go on to lose 5 of their final 6 games. They'd ultimately choke that number 1 seed. They'd choke the reins of the NFC East, and they'd ultimately fall to the 5th seed in the playoffs. And you could tell that the writing was on the wall. They were in close games in the fourth quarter to some of the worst teams in the NFL, and they would barely squeak out these wins. And then when the competition increased, they played the Cowboys twice, they saw the 49ers, they finally got exposed. And this defense was just flat out awful. They allowed the 2nd most passing yards in the league, and they allowed the 3rd most points per game in the entire NFL. But even with all the troubles on the offensive side of the ball, it was seemingly the bright spot of this team. Sirianni at one point, like I mentioned, wanted to call the plays, then he didn't want to call the plays. We see that he might have a fractured relationship with Jalen Hurts, and that's a big deal when you have your head coach and your starting quarterback with a discombobulated relationship. But this offense was still great last season. They were top 10 in yards per game, and they were top 10 in points per game, and we know it's because of all the playmakers that they have. Jalen Hurts is obviously a top 10 quarterback in the NFL. A.J. Brown, the all-pro receiver. Devontae Smith, an absolute stud on the outside, and they got playmakers, and they got even better this offseason. They added one of the best players and running backs in the NFL on their team in Saquon Barkley. I'm so excited to see how he can play in Philadelphia. Now, I know a lot of people were criticizing him that he went to the team that was inside of his division. Now, Saquon was never able to reach his full potential in New York. They had a bad offensive line. He was constantly banged up because of it. They never had a great passing game, so this led to defenses loading up the box, and Saquon would have to fight through so much adversity. But now you add Saquon to this Eagles squad where they have a great offensive line. They have a great run scheme. They have a great passing game with playmakers on the outside, and not to mention their quarterback is one of the best dual threats in the sport. They also switched up their coordinators on both sides of the ball. They brought in Kellen Moore to become their new offensive coordinator, and then they brought in Vic Fangio on the defensive side of the ball. But the clock is rapidly ticking for Nick Sirianni. They have new offensive coordinators. They added Saquon Barkley. They have one of the best rosters in the NFL, and at a certain point, you've got to get it done. Now, we saw last year, even though the Eagles had this horrendous secondary and would give up all these passing yards and points, this offense was still able to keep them in virtually every game, and I expect it to do the same this year. I think the Eagles have the best offense in the entire NFL from top to bottom, but if this defense can just play a little bit better, I think the Eagles are going to be a really scary team in the NFC. The division, I think, is going to be a cupcake for them. We'll start with the Commanders. Obviously, they added Jaden Daniels, but I don't think they're ready to emerge as a wild card team team or even a team that's going to be above 500. The same thing with the Giants. I know they added this flashy receiver in Malik Neighbors in the first round of the draft, but I still don't think that they're going to be able to do anything in the NFC or even in this division. And I think you look at this Cowboys team, they're potentially due for a regression. This all of a sudden has become a young and inexperienced offensive line. They don't have a great run game anymore. And what does this relationship look like with Jerry Jones and Dak Prescott? I just think there's so much unknown with this team. If they win 11 games again and lose in the first or second round of the playoffs, Mike McCarthy's definitely out the door. Dak Prescott, same thing with him. He hasn't been re-signed yet, and I don't think Jerry Jones is ready to commit to him. So I'm not sold on this Cowboys squad at all, and I really think this is the Eagles' division to take. And I think with everything considered, the NFC is very easy. The division that they're in is not very good. And right now, they're looking to try and take down the Lions, 49ers, and potentially the Packers. I think if the Eagles can shore up this secondary just a little bit, I think they're going to be one of the best teams in the NFL this season, and I'm expecting a big-time bounce back from them. But if we see them start slow and lose close games with the amount of talent that they have, this Philly fan base is going to get fired up, and Nick Sirianni's time may be coming to an end very soon. The Eagles are a dark horse team that nobody's talking about right now, and they have Super Bowl potential written all over them. I'm Caden Kubler, and that's my take.